My name is Audrey, and at 33 years old, I build my life around controlling crises for the corporate elite of Manhattan. As a crisis public relations executive, I am paid to anticipate disasters before they happen. But the one crisis I never saw coming was the bowl of soup my own sister handed me at her $3 million penthouse dinner party. She smiled at me with cold eyes, told me to stop acting like a spoiled child, and watched with deep satisfaction as my throat closed up in front of 20 VIP guests. What she did not realize was that the billionaire tech CEO sitting across from me was already dialing 911 with an EpiPen in his hand, and that her cruel little prank was about to become a federal crime. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to survive a toxic family member who wanted to see you fail. The air in the dining room was thick with the smell of expensive cologne and roasted meats. We were gathered at the newly purchased penthouse of my younger sister Naomi and her husband Jamal. Jamal is a 32-year-old African-American luxury real estate broker who has spent his entire career fighting twice as hard to secure a seat at the table with New York's wealthiest developers. I always respected his hustle. That was the only reason I agreed to attend this housewarming dinner. Jamal was trying to land an $8 million listing from my most important PR client, Harrison, a 42-year-old billionaire, tech CEO, who I had personally invited as a favor to my brother-in-law. I sat near the center of the long mahogany table, exhausted from a 60-hour workweek. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the city skyline, but the atmosphere inside felt suffocating. Naomi, who is 30 years old and calls herself a lifestyle influencer despite having no actual career, was playing the role of the perfect high society hostess. She wore a designer silk dress, she could barely afford laughing loudly, and pouring vintage wine for the guests. My parents, Thomas and Catherine, sat near the head of the table, looking at Naomi with absolute adoration. They had always treated her like the golden child, constantly making excuses for her vanity and her deep-rooted jealousy of my financial independence. The waiters began bringing out the first course. It was a creamy, pale orange bisque, served in wide porcelain bowls. The moment the waiter placed the dish in front of me, my stomach tied into a tight knot. I politely placed my hand over the bowl and looked up at the waiter, quietly declining the dish. I have had a severe, life-threatening shellfish allergy since I was 7 years old. The entire family knows this. A single drop of crab or lobster extract is enough to send me into level 4 anaphylactic shock. Naomi noticed my refusal from across the table. The charming hostess smile vanished from her face, replaced by a sharp, calculating glare. She stood up, picked up a fresh bowl of the soup from the serving cart, and walked directly over to my seat. The conversations around the table began to quiet down as the guests noticed the sudden shift in tension. Harrison looked up from his conversation with Jamal, his dark eyes narrowing as he watched my sister approach. Naomi placed the bowl forcefully in front of me. The liquid splashed slightly over the rim. "Come on, Audrey," she said, her voice intentionally loud enough for all 20 guests to hear. "You are 33 years old. Drop the childhood attention-seeking act. There is no crab in it. It is just a vegan tomato base with truffle. Do not insult my caterers just because you want to be the center of attention tonight." My mother, Catherine, immediately chimed in from the other end of the table. "Audrey, please do not ruin your sister's big night with your usual drama. Jamal has important clients here. Just eat the soup and stop being so difficult." I looked around the table. 20 pairs of eyes were staring at me. Jamal looked terrified, sweat beading on his forehead as he glanced between me and Harrison, desperate for the evening to go smoothly so he could secure his massive real estate commission. I knew Naomi was petty, but I honestly did not believe she would risk her husband's career just to humiliate me. I took a deep breath, picked up my silver spoon, and dipped it into the thick broth. I looked right into Naomi's eyes as I took a small bite, swallowing the warm liquid. Naomi smiled. It was not a smile of relief. It was a cold, victorious smirk. Less than 10 seconds later, the inside of my mouth began to burn like I had swallowed broken glass. A loud ringing noise erupted in my ears. I dropped the silver spoon, and it clattered loudly against the porcelain bowl. I tried to inhale, but my airway was swelling shut with terrifying speed. I grabbed the edge of the mahogany table, my knuckles turning white as I gasped for air that simply would not come. The room started spinning, and the last thing I saw before my vision blurred was Naomi sitting back in her chair, casually taking a sip of her white wine while I began to suffocate. I hit the hardwood floor hard, my shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. The heavy mahogany chair tipped over with a loud crash, sending silverware clattering across the room. I clawed at my own throat. My windpipe felt like it was clamped shut by an iron vise. The burning sensation had rapidly spread to my chest, and my skin erupted in angry red hives that felt like they were on fire. I tried to scream to ask for help, but all that escaped my lips was a terrible high-pitched wheezing sound. Panic rippled through the dining room. Several of the VIP guests jumped up from their seats, their faces pale with shock. But my own family did not move an inch to help me. My mother Diane let out an exasperated sigh and rolled her eyes. "Audrey, get up from the floor this instant," she snapped, her tone dripping with annoyance. "You are making an absolute spectacle of yourself. You swallowed one spoonful of soup. Stop being so dramatic." My father Richard crossed his arms and looked down at me with pure disappointment. "This is exactly why we hesitate to invite you to important family functions, Audrey. Always desperate to pull the attention away from your sister, get up before you ruin Jamal's evening completely." I lay there violently twitching, my vision darkening at the edges. I could not breathe. My brain was screaming for oxygen. Through the hazy, chaotic noise of the room, I heard Jamal's voice. He was not worried about my life. He was panicked about his interior design. "Hey, watch the rug!" Jamal shouted, waving his hands frantically as my flailing legs kicked against the floor. "That is a custom Persian silk rug. If she throws up on that, it is ruined." "Naomi, get her into the hallway. The hardwood is easier to clean." Naomi did not move. She just stared at me with that same cold, satisfied smirk, twirling the stem of her wineglass between her fingers. The darkness was rapidly closing in on me. I knew I had less than a minute before I would lose consciousness completely, and mere minutes after that before my heart stopped. I was going to die right there on my brother-in-law's Persian rug, surrounded by people who thought my murder was a petty tantrum. Then a sudden blur of motion broke the horrific standstill. Harrison kicked his heavy dining chair backward so forcefully that it slammed into the wall behind him. The billionaire tech executive did not hesitate or ask for permission. He vaulted over the corner of the table, shattering a crystal glass under his dress shoe, and dropped to his knees right beside me. "Where is your bag?" he demanded, his voice slicing through the room like a steel blade. I could not speak. I could only weakly point a trembling finger toward the entryway where the coats and purses had been left. Harrison turned his head and locked eyes with one of the terrified guests. The black leather tote by the door. "Bring it to me right now. Move." The guest scrambled to obey, tossing the bag across the room. Harrison caught it out of the air and ripped the zipper open, dumping the contents onto the floor. My wallet, keys, and makeup scattered everywhere, but his eyes immediately locked onto the bright yellow plastic tube, the EpiPen. Without a second of hesitation, Harrison grabbed the auto-injector, pulled off the blue safety release cap, and gripped my leg to hold me steady. "This is going to hurt," he muttered, right before he jammed the orange tip forcefully into the outer thigh of my leg, straight through the fabric of my expensive dress. The needle punctured my muscle, delivering the life-saving dose of epinephrine. I let out a choked gasp as the adrenaline rushed into my bloodstream. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs, but within seconds, the severe swelling in my airway began to slightly recede. I took my first, ragged, desperate breath of air. It felt like breathing through a tiny straw, but it was enough to keep me alive. Harrison kept the EpiPen pressed against my leg for a full 10 seconds, just like the medical instructions require. Once he pulled it away, he did not look at my parents. He did not look at Jamal. He pulled his cell phone from his tailored suit jacket and dialed 911, bringing it to his ear. His dark eyes slowly rose from the floor and locked dead onto Naomi. The look of pure, unadulterated rage on his face caused my sister's arrogant smirk to instantly vanish. "I need an ambulance at the Kensington Building penthouse 4. Harrison spoke into the phone, his voice echoing in the dead, silent room. "We have a 33-year-old female experiencing level 4 anaphylaxis, suspected poisoning. Send a bus now." He lowered the phone, never breaking eye contact with my sister. "No one leaves this room," he commanded. The steady, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor was the first thing that pulled me out of the darkness. My eyelids felt like they were made of lead, and when I finally managed to pry them open, the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room blinded me. My throat was raw and completely scratchy, a painful reminder of the breathing tube they had hastily shoved down my windpipe in the ambulance. My chest ached with every shallow breath. I turned my head slowly, taking in the sterile white walls, the tangle of IV tubes feeding fluids into my arm, and the thin cotton blanket draped over my shivering body. I was alive. I had survived by a matter of seconds. I expected to see a doctor or a nurse. I even expected to see Harrison, whose quick thinking had saved my life. Instead, the heavy door to my recovery room swung open and my parents walked in. There were no tears of relief in my mother's eyes. There was no desperate rush to my bedside to hold my hand. Diane was still wearing her expensive silk cocktail dress, though it was slightly wrinkled now, and her face was twisted into a tight, furious scowl. Richard followed closely behind her, aggressively checking his expensive watch, as if my near-death experience was severely cutting into his busy schedule. "Do you have any idea what you did?" Diane snapped before the door even clicked shut behind them. She did not ask how I was feeling. She did not ask what the doctors had said. She marched right up to the foot of my hospital bed and glared at me. I stared at her, my vocal cords still too inflamed to form a proper sentence. "Jamal was about to close an $8 million listing with Harrison tonight." Diane continued, her voice rising in pitch, echoing sharply off the sterile walls. $8 million, Audrey. And you had to make a scene. Harrison left the penthouse the second the paramedics loaded you onto the stretcher. He refused to shake Jamal's hand. He refused to even look at him. You cost your brother-in-law his biggest commission of the year, all because you could not handle a simple dinner party. I swallowed hard, the movement sending a sharp spike of pain down my throat. "You saw me suffocating." I managed to whisper, my voice sounding like crushed gravel. My airway was closed. I was dying on the floor. "Oh, please stop with the dramatics," Richard scoffed from the doorway, crossing his arms over his chest. "We all know you have an allergy, but there is a difference between a mild reaction and whatever theatrical performance you put on tonight. Naomi specifically told the caterers to use a vegan base. You probably just worked yourself into a panic attack because you could not stand the fact that your sister was hosting a successful event." I lay there frozen against the stiff hospital pillows. The absolute absurdity of their words washed over me like a bucket of ice water. A hospital doctor had literally just pumped my system full of steroids and antihistamines to stop my immune system from shutting down my organs. The medical chart sitting at the end of my bed proved I had suffered a massive life-threatening allergic reaction. Yet my parents were standing right in front of me, looking at my bruised arms and pale face, and choosing to protect Naomi's lie. It was in that exact moment, staring at the two people who were supposed to love and protect me unconditionally, that something inside me permanently snapped. For 33 years, I had exhausted myself trying to win their approval. I had achieved straight A grades. I had built a highly lucrative career. I had purchased them expensive gifts and funded their lavish vacations. I had done everything perfectly, hoping that one day they would look at me with the same blind adoration they gave to my sister. But looking at my mother smoothing out her designer dress while I lay hooked up to a heart monitor, the painful truth finally crystallized in my mind. My near-death experience was nothing more than an inconvenience to them. If I had died on that Persian rug tonight, their biggest concern would have been how the paramedics scuffed up the hardwood floors on their way out. They did not care about me. They never had. And they never would. A strange, cold sense of calm suddenly settled over me. The desperate approval-seeking daughter inside me died right there in that emergency room bed, and the ruthless crisis management executive took her place. I did not cry. I did not argue with them. I just stared at my mother with a blank, emotionless expression. "I need to rest," I said quietly, my voice devoid of any warmth. "Get out of my room." Diane let out a loud theatrical gasp, clearly offended by my tone. "Excuse me," she snapped. "We rushed all the way down here to check on you, and this is how you speak to us. You are unbelievably selfish, Audrey. Do not expect us to foot the bill for this ridiculous hospital stay." They turned around and stormed out of the room, letting the heavy door slam shut behind them. The room fell completely silent again, save for the steady beep of the heart monitor. I was entirely alone, but for the first time in my entire life, I did not feel abandoned. I felt liberated. They had drawn the battle lines clearly, and I was no longer going to play the role of the victim. The silence in my hospital room lasted for exactly 10 minutes. I was just beginning to process the reality of my parents' absolute betrayal when the heavy wooden door pushed open once again. I expected a nurse coming to check my vitals or adjust my intravenous fluids. Instead, Jamal walked in. He looked disheveled. His custom-tailored suit jacket was draped over one arm, and his silk tie was loosened around his neck. But the look on his face was not one of concern, regret, or relief that I was alive. It was pure, calculating business. He walked over to the side of my hospital bed, reached into his jacket pocket, and tossed a thick stack of stapled papers directly onto my lap. I looked down at the bold black letters printed across the top page. Non-disclosure agreement and waiver of liability. "Sign it," Audrey Jamal said, his voice low and tight. He leaned against the metal railing of my bed, crossing his arms over his chest. I already had my legal team drafted up on the ride over here. I stared at the document, genuinely stunned by the absolute audacity of the man standing in front of me. I was still hooked up to a heart monitor, my throat heavily bruised from a breathing tube, and he was asking me to sign away my legal rights to hold anyone accountable. "You cannot be serious," I whispered, my voice still incredibly raspy. "I am dead serious." Jamal fired back, his tone hardening instantly. "You know exactly how this industry works. As a black man in luxury real estate in Manhattan, my reputation is absolutely everything. I have spent years building a flawless portfolio and fighting tooth and nail for a seat at the table with guys like Harrison. I am not going to let a little allergy scare at my dinner party turn into a public scandal that ruins my entire career." "A little allergy scare." I repeated the words, burning my inflamed throat. I flatlined in the ambulance. "Jamal, your wife poisoned me." "Naomi made a careless mistake with the caterers," he interrupted quickly, waving his hand as if dismissing a minor inconvenience. "And we are sorry about that, truly. But you cannot sue us over this, Audrey. If you file a police report or a civil suit, the press will get hold of it. My brokerage will drop me by morning. You are going to sign that document, promise to keep your mouth shut, and in return, I will personally cover your medical bills tonight." He reached into his pocket, pulled out an expensive silver pen, and dropped it onto the papers resting on my legs. "Do the right thing for your family," he demanded. Before I could tell him exactly where he could shove his silver pen, my cell phone buzzed loudly on the plastic tray table next to my bed. I ignored Jamal, reaching over slowly with my bruised arm to pick it up. The screen lit up with a secure message notification from an unknown number. I swiped to open the text. It was from Harrison. The message read simply, "I thought you should see this before you speak to the police. I pulled it from your brother-in-law's smart home network while we were waiting for the paramedics to arrive." Attached below the text was a video file. I tapped the screen to play it. The footage was crystal clear, captured by the high-definition security camera installed in Jamal's own designer kitchen. The timestamp showed it was recorded just 20 minutes before I collapsed at the dinner table. The camera angle looked down directly at the marble kitchen island. There was Naomi. She was standing alone by the catering prep station, holding my specific bowl of vegan tomato bisque. But she was not just serving it. My sister reached into the pocket of her silk dress and pulled out a small, unlabeled glass vial filled with a dark amber liquid, pure concentrated crab extract. I watched in absolute horror as Naomi uncapped the vial and poured the entire contents directly into my soup. She took a spoon, stirred it carefully to hide the evidence into the thick broth, and then looked right up into the kitchen security camera. "Let us see how long this arrogant witch can keep up her little performance," Naomi whispered to herself on the recording, a wicked, delighted laugh escaping her lips as she picked up the bowl and walked toward the dining room. The video ended, the screen fading to black. I sat there in the hospital bed, my blood running completely cold. This was not a careless mistake with a caterer. This was not a prank gone wrong. My own sister had intentionally and maliciously tried to kill me, and she had laughed while doing it. "Well," Jamal prompted impatiently, tapping his fingers against the metal bedrail. "Are you going to sign the paper, or are we going to have a problem?" I looked up from my phone screen and met Jamal's eyes. He had no idea what I was holding in the palm of my hand. He had no idea that his own expensive security system had just handed me the ultimate weapon to destroy his entire life and send his wife to federal prison. I picked up the silver pen, clicked the top, and looked right at him with a dead, emotionless stare. "I think we are going to have a problem, Jamal," I said softly. I tossed the pen across the room, letting the unsigned contract slide off my lap and flutter onto the hospital floor. Jamal stood frozen, his eyes darting from the scattered papers on the floor to my cold expression. He opened his mouth to argue, but I did not give him the chance. I reached over to my left arm, gripped the plastic hub of the intravenous line, and pulled the needle straight out of my vein. A small drop of blood trickled down my skin, but I ignored it. I swung my legs over the edge of the hospital bed, my bare feet hitting the cold linoleum floor. Jamal took a step back, genuinely alarmed by my calm demeanor. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice cracking slightly as his professional facade began to slip. "You cannot leave. The doctor said you need to be monitored." I walked right past him without uttering a single syllable. I stepped out into the brightly lit hospital corridor and headed straight for the nurse's station. "I am signing out against medical advice," I told the head nurse, my voice completely devoid of emotion. She looked at my bruised neck and the hospital gown I was still wearing over my clothes, then glanced at Jamal, who was jogging out of my room, his face flushed red with panic. "Audrey, stop being crazy," Jamal hissed, grabbing my elbow. "If you walk out of here and talk to the press, I swear to God, I will sue you for defamation. My lawyers will destroy you." I slowly turned my head, looking down at his hand gripping my arm. The dead empty look in my eyes must have terrified him because he immediately let go. I signed the digital discharge tablet the nurse handed me, turned on my heel, and walked toward the elevator. The automatic doors of the hospital lobby slid open, letting in the cool night air. Parked directly at the curb was a sleek black Maybach. The rear door pushed open before I even reached the sidewalk. Harrison was sitting inside, his face illuminated by the glow of a tablet. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not offer empty platitudes. He simply nodded. I slid into the leather seat and pulled the door shut, leaving Jamal standing on the hospital steps shouting my name into the empty street. The drive to my apartment was silent. Harrison understood that I did not need comfort. I needed to strategize. When the car pulled up to my building, he looked at me and spoke with absolute authority. "Whatever you need, Audrey. You have my entire legal team and my personal security at your disposal." I thanked him, stepped out of the car, and took the private elevator up to my floor. I walked into my quiet, empty apartment. I did not collapse onto the couch. I did not cry. I walked straight to my home office, turned on the overhead lights, and booted up my laptop. For the past decade, I had built a reputation in Manhattan for taking catastrophic corporate scandals and systematically dismantling the opposition. Now the crisis was my own family, and they were about to experience the full terrifying force of a seasoned public relations executive. I placed my cell phone on the desk. It was vibrating constantly. My mother had called 6 times. My father had left 3 voicemails. Naomi was sending rapid-fire text messages, alternating between calling me a dramatic liar and demanding to know where I had gone. They expected me to yell. They expected me to send an emotional, angry paragraph defending myself, giving them the ammunition they needed to paint me as the unstable, jealous sister. But I gave them absolutely nothing. I muted the phone and shoved it into a drawer. The silence from my end was a deliberate tactical move. In crisis management, silence breeds paranoia in the guilty party. I opened a blank encrypted document on my computer and titled it Operation Backfire. I did not waste time looking at my sister's social media. Instead, I began pulling public property records for Jamal's real estate brokerage. I identified his licensing board. I tracked down the brand sponsors who paid Naomi for her fake lifestyle influencer posts. My family thought they had won because they controlled the narrative at the dinner party. They thought I was just the weak allergic sister who would eventually cave to their demands to keep the peace. But as I sat in my home office pulling up the digital footprints of their financial lives, they were sitting in their $3 million penthouse, sweating over my silence. They had no idea that I was not just planning to clear my name. I was planning to systematically dismantle their entire fraudulent empire piece by piece until they had absolutely nothing left. The next morning, I walked into the sleek glass and steel lobby of my Manhattan public relations firm. I wore a tailored navy blue suit and dark sunglasses to hide the faint shadows under my eyes. My throat still ached with every swallow, and a high-collared silk blouse completely concealed the dark bruising on my neck from the emergency breathing tube. But other than those physical reminders, I was completely back in my element. I was no longer the helpless victim gasping for air on a Persian rug. I was a senior executive walking into a war room. I nodded to my assistant as I approached my corner office. But before I could even reach for the heavy glass door, a familiar, angry voice called out my name. Audrey. I stopped and turned around. Jamal was standing in the middle of the busy bullpen. He must have slipped past the downstairs security desk by tailgating one of the delivery couriers. He was not wearing his usual perfectly tailored suit today. He looked frantic, his tie missing, and his collar unbuttoned. Several of my junior analysts stopped typing and stared at him. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely neutral and professional. "We need to talk," Jamal said, marching toward me with a sense of unearned authority. "You are not answering any of our calls. Your parents are worried sick. Naomi was crying all night. You cannot just vanish after a misunderstanding and leave your family in the dark." I stepped inside my office and left the door open, forcing him to follow me in, where my assistant could clearly see us. I walked behind my massive mahogany desk and sat down in my leather chair. I did not offer him a seat. "There is nothing to talk about, Jamal," I said calmly, folding my hands on the desk. "You are trespassing in my place of work." Jamal placed both of his hands flat on my desk and leaned forward, lowering his voice to an aggressive hiss. "Do not play these corporate games with me, Audrey. You think you are so smart with this silent treatment. But you are tearing this family apart. Do you have any idea what you are doing to your sister? She is an absolute mess. Are you really going to destroy your sister's marriage over a stupid catering mistake?" I looked at him, feeling a wave of absolute disgust. He was still clinging to the lie. He still thought I was completely in the dark. "You know exactly how hard I have worked to get where I am," Jamal continued, his tone shifting from aggressive to manipulative. He was playing his favorite card. "I am a black man trying to survive in a luxury real estate market dominated by old money and generational wealth. I have to be perfect. If you go public with this ridiculous allergy story, the developers will drop me. Harrison already pulled his listing from me this morning. Did you tell him to do that? Are you trying to ruin my life just to punish Naomi?" I sat perfectly still, letting him exhaust himself. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to yell, to cry, to argue about the soup so he could secretly record me sounding unhinged. I gave him nothing but a cold, clinical stare. "Harrison makes his own business decisions," I replied smoothly. "If he decided you are a liability to his brand, that is between you and him. It has nothing to do with me." Jamal slammed his fist on my desk. "Stop lying to me. You are trying to sabotage us because you are jealous. You have always been jealous that Naomi found a good husband, and you are still sitting alone in this sterile office." I reached over to the sleek black telephone on my desk. I pressed the intercom button connected directly to the front desk security team. Yes, Miss Audrey, the head of security answered immediately through the speaker. Frank, I have a trespasser in my office, I said, clearly not breaking eye contact with Jamal. Please send 2 guards to escort him out of the building immediately. If he resists in any way, call the police. Jamal stood up straight, his face twisting into a mixture of pure shock and fury. You are calling security on your own brother-in-law. Have you lost your mind? We are family. I stood up from my chair, leaning forward slightly so he could hear every single word I said next. You sell houses, Jamal, not ethics, I said, my voice dropping to a freezing whisper. And as of last night, we are no longer family. Have your lawyer contact mine. 2 large security guards in dark suits appeared at the doorway of my office. Jamal looked at them, then looked back at me, his chest heaving with anger. He pointed a shaking finger at my face. You are going to regret this, Audrey, he threatened, stepping back toward the door. You are making a massive mistake. I watched in silence as the guards grabbed him by both arms and physically escorted him out of the office, parading him past dozens of my staring employees. Jamal tried to maintain his dignity, straightening his jacket, but the humiliation was absolute. He had come here to intimidate me into submission, thinking I was still the fragile sister who craved my parents' approval. He had no idea that throwing him out of my office was just the opening move. The real destruction was about to begin. By the time the security guards escorted Jamal out of the glass doors of my firm, the adrenaline had barely settled in my veins. I walked back to my desk, fully intending to dive into my morning meetings. But my sister was never one to let a dramatic moment go to waste. Before I could even open my email, my assistant knocked frantically on the doorframe. She looked pale, holding her tablet tightly against her chest. She told me I needed to look at Instagram right now. I took the tablet from her trembling hands. Naomi had just posted a 5-minute video to her lifestyle page. She was sitting on the expensive velvet sofa in her penthouse, wearing no makeup, her blonde hair messy to give the illusion of distress. The lighting was perfectly angled to catch the fake tears rolling down her cheeks. She looked straight into the camera and began to speak with a trembling, breathless voice. I never thought I would have to make a video like this, Naomi cried, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her oversized sweater. But dealing with a toxic family member is something no one should have to suffer in silence. Last night, my husband Jamal and I hosted our first dinner party in our new home. We worked so hard for it. But my older sister Audrey has always been deeply jealous of our happiness. She is 33, single, and resentful. So she decided to ruin our housewarming by faking a severe medical emergency right at the dinner table. She faked an allergy attack just to steal the spotlight and humiliate my husband in front of his biggest clients. I watched the video with a completely blank expression. Naomi was using all the right buzzwords to weaponize her audience. She called me a narcissist. She claimed I had a history of emotional abuse. She painted herself as the innocent, hard-working wife, just trying to protect her black husband from his cruel, privileged sister-in-law. But the part that truly turned my stomach was the comment section. The video was going viral, racking up thousands of views by the minute. Pinned right at the top of the comments were messages from my own parents. My mother, Diane, wrote, "We are so sorry you have to deal with her toxic behavior, sweetie. Your father and I stand with you and Jamal. We love you both." My father, Richard, replied right beneath it, sending praying hands emojis and adding, "Family should build you up, not tear you down. Stay strong, Naomi." The narrative was set. To the outside world, I was a monster. Within an hour, my personal inbox and my direct messages were completely flooded with hate mail from absolute strangers. People were calling me a psycho. They were telling me I deserved to be cut off. Some even told me I should lose my job for trying to ruin a black man's real estate career out of pure spite. My assistant stood in front of my desk, wringing her hands in panic. She asked if we should issue an emergency press release or have our legal department send a cease and desist letter to get the video taken down. I handed the tablet back to her and shook my head. "No," I said calmly. "We do nothing. Do not engage. Do not reply to a single comment." My assistant looked at me like I was insane. She reminded me that this could damage my professional reputation. but I knew exactly what I was doing. As a crisis management expert, I recognize a distraction tactic when I see one. Naomi was overcompensating. People who are genuinely innocent do not rush to social media to cry on camera the morning after a disaster. They do that when they are desperately trying to control the narrative because they are terrified of what is actually hiding in the shadows. Naomi poured pure crab extract into my soup. She wanted me dead. And you do not try to murder your own sister just because you are petty. You do it because you need something from her. I waited for my assistant to leave the room and close the door. Then I picked up my phone and dialed a private number I kept reserved for the most sensitive corporate espionage cases. It was a high-end forensic accountant named David who specialized in tracking hidden assets and offshore debt. David answered on the second ring. I told him I needed a complete unredacted financial deep dive into Jamal and Naomi. I wanted to see every bank account, every credit card statement, every investment portfolio, and every hidden loan under their names. I told him I needed it by midnight, and I did not care how much it cost. Let the internet hate me for a few more hours. Let my parents comfort their golden child. While Naomi was busy fighting a public relations war with fake tears on Instagram, I was going to follow the money. Because money never lies, and I was absolutely certain it was going to lead me straight to their destruction. It was nearly midnight by the time I finally left my office and returned to my apartment. The city outside my window was quiet, but my mind was racing with absolute clarity. I did not turn on the main lights. I simply walked into my kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and sat at the marble island with my laptop open. I was waiting for the one thing that would give me the exact leverage I needed. At exactly 11:59, my secure email client chimed loudly in the silent room. It was a message from David, the forensic accountant I had hired just hours earlier. The subject line was blank. Attached to the email was a highly encrypted document containing over 200 pages of raw financial data. I typed in the decryption password and began to read. I have spent my entire career analyzing corporate bankruptcies and financial scandals, so reading a complicated balance sheet is second nature to me. But what I saw in Jamal's and Naomi's financial records was not just poor money management. It was a complete and utter catastrophe hidden behind a carefully curated social media facade. The $3 million penthouse where I had nearly died the night before was nothing but a fragile house of cards. Jamal had taken out a massive high-interest mortgage that he could barely afford using heavily doctored income statements to secure the loan from the bank. Naomi's lavish lifestyle aesthetic was entirely funded by 12 different credit cards, all of which were completely maxed out and severely past due. But the credit card debt was just a drop in the ocean. I scrolled down to page 40, where David had highlighted a series of offshore wire transfers marked in red. Over the past 18 months, Jamal had been secretly funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars into highly volatile cryptocurrency markets. He thought he could outsmart the system. When the markets inevitably crashed, Jamal did not cut his losses. He doubled down, borrowing money from unregulated private lenders to cover his massive margin calls. By the time they hosted their extravagant housewarming dinner, Jamal and Naomi were exactly $2 million in debt. The private lenders were demanding immediate payment. Jamal's real estate firm was completely unaware of his financial ruin. But if the debt became public knowledge, his luxury broker license would be permanently revoked. They were mere weeks away from total bankruptcy and potential criminal charges for the forged mortgage documents. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen. This explained Naomi's desperation to keep up appearances. This explained Jamal's absolute panic when Harrison pulled his $8 million listing that morning. They needed that massive real estate commission just to make their minimum loan payments and keep the wolves at bay for one more month. But as I scrolled to the very last page of the document, the blood in my veins turned to ice. David had attached an urgent warning flag to an external document he had found buried deep in a joint checking account. It was a digital receipt for a premium payment made to a major life insurance company. I opened the attached file. It was a newly minted life insurance policy. The insured individual listed on the document was me. The policy had been taken out exactly 2 months ago. The payout in the event of my accidental death or sudden medical emergency was a staggering $5 million. I stared at the digital signature at the bottom of the contract. It was a flawless forgery of my handwriting, and listed right there on the final line as the sole and exclusive beneficiary of the $5 million was my sister Naomi. My breath caught in my throat as the pieces of the puzzle violently snapped together. Naomi did not pour the pure crab extract into my soup just to humiliate me in front of wealthy guests. She did not do it because she was a jealous younger sister trying to ruin my evening. The fake tears on Instagram, the claims of an innocent catering mistake, my parents blindly defending her toxic behavior. It was all a pathetic smokescreen. This was never a careless prank. It was a carefully calculated, financially motivated hit. They needed $2 million to save their fraudulent lifestyle and keep Jamal out of federal prison. I was worth $5 million to them dead. If I had suffocated on that Persian rug, Naomi would have played the grieving, heartbroken sister. She would have cashed the massive insurance check, paid off the dangerous crypto lenders, and lived happily ever after in her luxury penthouse with my parents' blessing. I closed the laptop slowly. The silence of my apartment felt completely different now. It was no longer the silence of a woman planning to teach her arrogant family a lesson. It was the absolute silence of a woman who had just stared into the face of her own murder. My sister had put a price tag on my life, and she had smiled at me while I choked. I picked up my phone and opened my contacts. I did not need to wait for the morning. I was going to burn their entire world to the ground, and I was going to make sure they watched it turn to ash. I dialed Harrison's private number. It was past midnight, but the billionaire tech executive answered on the first ring. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I told him I had the forensic accounting report. I explained the $2 million in hidden cryptocurrency debt. I told him about the forged life insurance policy and the $5 million payout my sister had tried to secure by serving me that bowl of soup. Harrison listened in absolute silence. When I finished speaking, he did not express shock or offer empty pity. He is a man who builds empires, and he understands the mechanics of war. He simply asked me where I wanted to strike first. I told him I wanted to start with Jamal's pride. I wanted to dismantle his entire professional identity before I brought down the legal hammer. Harrison told me to leave it to him and get some sleep. The very next morning, the sun rose over the manicured green lawns of the elite Westchester Country Club. Harrison had a standing tea time with the senior managing partners of Jamal's real estate brokerage. These were the men who controlled the luxury property market in Manhattan. They were the men Jamal had spent his entire adult life trying to impress. Harrison arrived in the clubhouse looking perfectly relaxed in his designer sportswear. He did not yell or make a dramatic scene. Billionaires do not need to raise their voices to destroy a life. They just need to make a suggestion. By the third hole, as the morning dew was still fresh on the grass, Harrison casually mentioned that his financial advisors were restructuring his entire real estate portfolio. He told the managing partners that he was pulling all of his massive investments from their upcoming commercial developments. He also mentioned very subtly that he had deep concerns about the ethical practices and the financial stability of their junior brokers. He specifically named Jamal. He told them he could not in good conscience do business with a firm that employed such massive liabilities. He painted Jamal not just as an annoyance, but as a dangerous risk to their corporate brand. The managing partners panicked immediately. Harrison was not just a wealthy client. He was the anchor investor for their entire third-quarter earnings. If he walked away, their stock prices would plummet, and their board of directors would demand answers. They practically begged him to reconsider offering to make any necessary adjustments to keep his business. Harrison simply hit his golf ball straight down the fairway, handed his iron club to his caddy, and started walking toward the golf cart. He told them his decision was absolutely final as long as their current roster of agents remained unchanged. The message was loud and clear. Jamal was a poison pill, and they needed to spit him out before lunch. Less than 24 hours after Naomi posted her fake crying video on social media, Jamal was called into the corner office of his brokerage firm. He walked in wearing his expensive custom suit, probably expecting to receive a new luxury listing or a pep talk about market conditions. Instead, the head of the firm handed him a cheap cardboard box and a strict severance agreement. They did not even let him return to his desk to collect his files. They told him his services were no longer required and that his continued presence was a direct conflict of interest for their top-tier investors. Jamal tried to argue. He tried to leverage his status as a prominent luxury broker, claiming they were making a terrible mistake. But the partners were completely unfazed. Two large security guards escorted him out through the back service elevator, treating him like a common criminal rather than a top-producing agent. He was forced to walk out onto the busy Manhattan street, holding a small box of desk ornaments completely stripped of the prestige he had sacrificed his own morals to protect. Jamal was entirely blindsided by the sudden termination. He had spent years building a carefully crafted image of success, and it was ripped away from him in a matter of minutes. But the truly pathetic part was that he had absolutely no idea I was the one pulling the strings from the shadows. He thought this was just a consequence of sudden market shifts and bad luck in the industry. He assumed Harrison pulling out of the housewarming party was just a temporary setback, completely oblivious to the fact that it was a targeted assassination of his career. Later that afternoon, my mother sent a frantic text message to our family group chat. She said Jamal had just been laid off due to sudden corporate downsizing. She told everyone to be extra supportive and to keep Naomi in our thoughts because the financial stress was simply too much for her to bear. I read the message while sitting at my desk in my corner office sipping a hot cup of black coffee. I did not type a single word in reply. I just smiled to myself. They thought the worst thing that could possibly happen to them was a sudden job loss. They had no idea the financial slaughter had only just begun. The first domino had fallen perfectly, and it was about to crush their entire fake empire. At 9 o'clock the following morning, my legal team officially served Naomi and Jamal with a massive civil lawsuit for personal injury and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I made sure the process server delivered the thick stack of legal documents right to the lobby of their luxury apartment building, ensuring the concierge and the doorman both witnessed the humiliation. Less than 2 hours later, my office phone rang. It was my father. He did not yell. His voice was tight-strained with a desperate kind of forced politeness. He asked me to meet him and my mother for lunch at an upscale French bistro in Midtown. He said it was time to put an end to this family feud before it went too far. I knew exactly what this was. It was not a peace offering. It was a trap. But it was a trap I desperately needed them to set. I arrived at the crowded bistro right at noon. The restaurant was packed with corporate executives and wealthy socialites. The loud clinking of silverware and the steady hum of conversations provided the perfect auditory cover for what I was about to do. Before I stepped through the glass doors, I unlocked my cell phone, opened the voice memo application, and hit record. I slipped the phone into the breast pocket of my tailored blazer, ensuring the microphone was perfectly positioned. Richard and Diane were already seated at a corner booth. They looked like they had aged 10 years overnight. The smug, dismissive arrogance they had displayed in my hospital room was entirely gone, replaced by a frantic, nervous energy. I slid into the leather booth across from them and folded my hands on the table. I did not bother looking at the menu. "Audrey, thank you for coming." My father began, his eyes darting nervously around the restaurant. "We received the notice from your lawyers this morning. This civil suit you filed against your sister is completely out of control. Jamal just lost his job yesterday. They are under an immense amount of financial pressure. You cannot do this to them." I stared at him blankly. "I am simply seeking damages for a severe medical event that occurred on their property," I replied smoothly, keeping my voice calm and measured for the recording. "If they have nothing to hide, they have nothing to worry about." My mother Diane leaned forward, her face flushed with anger she was barely trying to suppress. "Stop playing these corporate games with us, Audrey. You know exactly what you are doing. You are trying to bankrupt your own sister over a stupid mistake." Richard quickly held up a hand to silence her. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket, pulled out a folded slip of paper, and slid it across the white tablecloth toward me. I looked down. It was a cashier's check made out to me. The amount was exactly $50,000. Take it, my father said, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. It is from our retirement savings. It will more than cover your hospital bills and whatever time you took off work. Take the money, call your lawyers right now, and drop the lawsuit. I looked at the check, genuinely amazed by the depths of their delusion. They were literally trying to bribe a crisis management executive who made nearly $500,000 a year with a $50,000 check. You cannot sue her, Audrey, my mother pleaded, her tone suddenly shifting to a desperate whine. Naomi is pregnant. The words hung in the air between us. She was using a phantom pregnancy to shield an attempted murderer. Whether Naomi was actually pregnant or just lying to manipulate our parents did not matter to me anymore. I placed my index finger on the edge of the check and slowly pushed it back across the table. You want me to drop the lawsuit? I asked, leaning in closer so the microphone in my pocket would pick up every single syllable. You want me to protect her after what she did? Tell me the truth right now. You knew she poisoned me, did you not? You knew she put the crab extract in the soup. My father looked down at his water glass, too cowardly to meet my eyes. But my mother could not help herself. Her deep-rooted need to defend her golden child overpowered her basic common sense. Oh, for heaven's sake, Diane scoffed, waving her hand dismissively in the air. She just wanted to teach you a lesson. You are always so high and mighty, always acting so superior to her. She put a few drops in the bowl to knock you off your pedestal and show Jamal that you are not invincible. You did not die, did you? You spent a few hours in the hospital and now you are perfectly fine. I sat perfectly still, letting the absolute cruelty of her words burn themselves into the digital recording. The loud chatter of the bistro seemed to fade away completely. For 33 years, I had agonized over why my mother could not love me. Now, hearing her casually justify my near-fatal poisoning as a necessary lesson, the last remaining thread of my childhood attachment permanently snapped. She had just confessed. She admitted that she knew the poisoning was intentional, and she admitted that my own parents had conspired to cover up a violent felony just to protect their favorite daughter. I did not yell. I did not flip the table or cause a scene. I simply reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped the red button to stop the recording. I placed the phone face up on the table. Richard and Diane stared at the screen, recognizing the audio wave lines. The color instantly drained from my father's face. Thank you for lunch, I said, my voice as cold as ice. But I will not be dropping the civil suit. In fact, I think I will be taking this audio file directly to my legal team. Have a wonderful afternoon. I stood up, smoothed out my blazer, and walked out of the crowded bistro, leaving the $50,000 check sitting abandoned on the table. It was late afternoon when the heavy brass knocker on the door of the penthouse finally sounded. Inside, the atmosphere was already incredibly tense. Jamal had spent the entire morning pacing the hardwood floors, desperately calling his former contacts and leaving increasingly frantic voicemails trying to figure out why his prestigious real estate firm had so abruptly fired him. Naomi was sitting on her velvet sofa, completely ignoring her husband's panic. Instead, she was scrolling through her social media feed on her phone, basking in the endless validation of the thousands of strangers who had believed her fake crying video from the day before. A second sharper knock interrupted the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Jamal rubbed his exhausted face and walked over to pull the heavy wooden door open. Standing in the hallway was a man wearing a plain gray suit and holding a thick, securely sealed manila envelope. "Are you Naomi?" the man asked, looking past Jamal to where my sister was sitting. Naomi sighed loudly, clearly annoyed by the interruption. She stood up, smoothed out her designer loungewear, and walked over to the door. "I am Naomi," she answered, crossing her arms. "Who are you, and how did you get past the lobby concierge?" The man did not answer her question. He simply reached out, pressed the heavy manila envelope firmly against her chest, and took a step back. "You have been formally served," he said, turning around and walking toward the elevator without another word. Jamal turned completely pale. He reached over and took the envelope from Naomi's hands, ripping the top open. He pulled out the massive stack of legal documents. Printed across the very first page in bold black ink was a civil lawsuit filed by my legal team. It detailed severe personal injury, gross negligence, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The damages I was seeking were completely astronomical, designed to absolutely bankrupt anyone who did not have millions of dollars in liquid assets. Jamal dropped the papers onto the marble kitchen island. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. "We are ruined," he whispered, his voice cracking with genuine terror. "Audrey is actually suing us. I just lost my job. The crypto lenders are demanding their money by the end of the month, and now your sister is dragging us into a massive legal battle. We do not have the money to fight this, Naomi. We are completely finished." Naomi picked up the lawsuit. She read through the first few pages, looking at the massive dollar amounts I was demanding. But instead of panicking like her husband, Naomi did something entirely different. She threw her head back and laughed. It was a loud, genuine laugh of pure, unadulterated arrogance. "Are you actually scared of this?" Naomi asked, tossing the thick stack of papers back onto the marble counter like it was a piece of junk mail. "Look at this, Jamal. This is nothing but a pathetic scare tactic. Audrey is just throwing a massive corporate temper tantrum because she knows she cannot actually touch us." Jamal stared at her, completely bewildered by her reaction. "She is a senior executive with a ruthless legal team," he argued, pointing desperately at the documents. "They are going to depose us. They are going to subpoena our financial records." "Let them," Naomi interrupted, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "Audrey has absolutely no proof of anything. Think about it. There were 20 people in this room and not a single one of them saw me put anything into her bowl. My parents are firmly on our side, and they will gladly testify under oath that it was just an innocent misunderstanding with the catering company. It is her word against mine, and right now, the entire internet is on my side. She is just trying to intimidate us into begging for forgiveness." Naomi walked over to her velvet sofa, picked up her laptop and opened it. She confidently typed the name of one of the most ruthless and notoriously expensive civil defense attorneys in Manhattan into the search bar. "What are you doing?" Jamal asked, walking over to stand behind her. "I am calling her bluff," Naomi replied with a wicked smile. "We cannot afford to look weak right now. If we back down or try to settle, it makes us look guilty. We are going to hire the best lawyer in the city and humiliate Audrey in a deposition. We will counter-sue her for defamation and make her pay for your lost wages." Jamal gripped the back of the sofa. "We do not have any money for a lawyer," he reminded her through gritted teeth. "We are $2 million in debt." Naomi ignored him. She clicked on the attorney's website and opened the retainer agreement portal. The firm required a $50,000 upfront payment just to take the case. Naomi did not even blink. She reached into her designer purse, pulled out a brand new high-interest credit card she had secretly opened under Jamal's name just a week prior, and began typing the numbers into the payment screen. Jamal watched in horror as the transaction was approved. He was too exhausted and broken to stop her. Naomi smiled at the confirmation screen, genuinely believing she had just outsmarted me. She thought she was building an impenetrable defense. She had absolutely no idea that she was just financing her own funeral, completely unaware of the devastating evidence I was quietly holding in the palm of my hand. 4 weeks after the process server visited the penthouse, we gathered in the freezing, sterile conference room of my legal firm. The room was designed to be intimidating. The massive glass table reflected the harsh overhead lights, and the heavy soundproof doors sealed us inside with the absolute quiet of an impending execution. Sitting to my left was my lead attorney, Gregory, a man known for tearing apart hostile witnesses with surgical precision. Across the table sat Naomi Jamal and the incredibly expensive defense attorney Naomi had hired on credit, a sharp-looking woman named Ms. Montgomery. Naomi was dressed carefully for the occasion. She wore a modest beige blouse and minimal makeup, clearly instructed by her lawyer to look like a stressed, innocent mother-to-be. Jamal, however, looked entirely hollow. He was wearing one of his custom Italian suits, but it hung loosely on his frame. The past month of unemployment and hiding from his creditors had taken a severe physical toll on him. At exactly 10 in the morning, the certified court reporter sitting at the end of the table asked Naomi and Jamal to raise their right hands. They swore under the penalty of perjury to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I watched them both say I do without a single ounce of hesitation. Gregory opened his sleek leather folder and began the deposition. He started with Naomi, his voice perfectly calm and conversational. He asked her to walk us through the events of the housewarming party. Naomi leaned into the microphone and began to spin her carefully rehearsed fairy tale. She claimed that she had ordered a strict vegan menu. She claimed that my severe allergy had never been explicitly discussed. I had no idea it was a life-threatening condition, Naomi stated, looking directly at the court reporter with wide, innocent eyes. Audrey always liked to complain about her diet. I thought she just had a mild intolerance to shellfish. I never would have intentionally served her anything dangerous. Gregory did not look up from his notepad. Did you personally handle any of the food preparation that evening? He asked smoothly. Absolutely not, Naomi answered firmly. The catering staff handled every single dish. I did not step foot in the kitchen once the guests arrived. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I did not roll my eyes. I did not scoff. I simply listened as my sister committed a federal felony right in front of me. Lying under oath during a legal deposition is perjury. Naomi thought she was outsmarting my legal team by sticking to her Instagram narrative. She had absolutely no idea that I already possessed the high-definition security footage of her standing alone in her own kitchen, pouring the pure crab extract directly into my bowl. Every single word she spoke was adding another year to her potential prison sentence. Gregory moved on to Jamal. In a civil suit involving personal injury and damages establishing the financial standing of the defendants is a standard procedure. Gregory asked Jamal about his current employment status. I am currently transitioning between luxury brokerages. Jamal lied smoothly, adjusting his expensive tie. I decided to leave my previous firm to pursue more lucrative opportunities. Gregory made a small checkmark on his legal pad. And would you say you and your wife are currently experiencing any financial distress? Ms. Montgomery shifted slightly in her chair, but Jamal answered before she could object. No, we are perfectly stable, he said confidently. We live comfortably within our means. Do you hold any significant debts outside of your primary mortgage? Gregory pressed further, his tone remaining deceptively light. Specifically any high-yield loans or cryptocurrency margins? Jamal did not even blink. No, none at all. I felt a cold, deep satisfaction wash over me. Jamal had just sworn under oath that he had no hidden debts, completely unaware that my forensic accountant had already handed me the offshore wire transfers, proving he owed $2 million to unregulated lenders. He was lying through his teeth to protect his fragile ego, digging his grave right next to his wife's. For 4 straight hours, Gregory let them talk. He let them build a towering fortress of absolute lies. Ms. Montgomery looked incredibly smug, clearly believing her clients were performing flawlessly. She thought my legal team was weak because Gregory was not aggressively challenging their statements. She thought we had no evidence. When the court reporter finally announced that we were off the record for the day, Naomi shot me a victorious, arrogant smirk across the glass table. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully manipulated the legal system, just like she manipulated our parents. But this was only day 1 of the deposition. I had purposely instructed Gregory to let them lie today. I wanted them firmly on the record. Tomorrow was day 2, and tomorrow I was going to drop the guillotine. The second day of the deposition began at exactly 9 in the morning. The harsh fluorescent lights of the conference room felt even brighter today. Naomi walked in carrying a designer coffee cup, looking completely relaxed. She took her seat across from me with a confident, almost bored expression. Jamal looked slightly better than the day before, clearly believing they had successfully navigated the hardest part of the legal process. Ms. Montgomery organized her legal pads with crisp, efficient movements, completely unaware that she was about to watch her entire case disintegrate in real time. Gregory cleared his throat and waited for the court reporter to indicate we were back on the record. Good morning, Gregory said smoothly. Before we introduce our exhibits, I want to confirm the statements made yesterday. Jamal, you testified under oath that you have no high-yield loans or hidden debts. Is that correct? Jamal nodded confidently. Yes, that is correct. And Naomi Gregory continued, turning his attention to my sister. You testified under oath that you had no knowledge of the severity of Audrey's allergy and that you never entered the kitchen or handled the food preparation yourself. Do you stand by that testimony? I absolutely do, Naomi replied, offering a tight, patronizing smile. Gregory reached down to his sleek leather briefcase resting on the floor. The metallic click of the latches echoed sharply in the quiet room. He pulled out a single thick manila folder and placed it gently onto the glass table. Let the record reflect that plaintiff counsel is now introducing Exhibit A, Gregory stated. He pulled a stapled packet of financial documents from the folder and slid it across the glass directly toward Jamal. Jamal looked down. It was the unredacted forensic accounting report David had provided me. Gregory did not give him time to process it before he started reading the highlighted sections aloud. Exhibit A is a comprehensive financial disclosure detailing offshore wire transfers made over the past 18 months. Gregory said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. It shows that Jamal currently holds exactly $2 million in unregulated cryptocurrency debt, which is severely past due. Jamal physically recoiled from the paper as if it had burned him. The color completely drained from his face. Ms. Montgomery quickly grabbed the document, her eyes scanning the pages frantically. She had no idea this massive debt existed. Her own client had lied to her. Before Ms. Montgomery could even formulate an objection, Gregory reached into the folder again. He pulled out a slim digital tablet, tapped the screen to load a video file, and pushed it across the table toward Naomi. Let the record reflect that we are introducing Exhibit B. Gregory continued, his tone remaining perfectly neutral. This is security footage recovered directly from the defendant's own smart home network, time-stamped the exact evening of the incident. The video began to play. The volume on the tablet was turned all the way up. The sound of Naomi laughing filled the dead-silent conference room. Everyone watched the high-definition footage of my sister standing alone in her kitchen, pulling the glass vial from her silk dress and pouring the concentrated crab extract directly into my soup. Let us see how long this arrogant witch can keep up her little performance. Naomi's recorded voice echoed from the small speakers. Naomi stopped breathing. Her hands began to tremble so violently that her designer coffee cup rattled against the glass table. She stared at the frozen image of herself on the screen, her mouth opening and closing without a single sound coming out. But Gregory was not finished. He reached into the folder one last time and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He slid it directly between Naomi and Jamal. And finally, Exhibit C. Gregory announced, locking eyes with the defense attorney. A $5 million life insurance policy taken out on my client's life exactly 2 months ago. The signature has been verified as a forgery by an independent handwriting expert. The sole beneficiary listed is Naomi. Jamal turned his head slowly to look at his wife. He knew about his own cryptocurrency debt and had lied to protect his ego. But looking at the forged life insurance document, the horrifying truth finally broke through his denial. He did not know about the poison. He did not know about the forged signature. He realized in that exact second that the woman sitting next to him had actively tried to murder her own sister to pay off his financial mistakes. Jamal pushed his chair back physically, distancing himself from Naomi as if she were suddenly radioactive. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. The only sound in the room was the rapid rhythmic clicking of the court reporter's keyboard, documenting every single devastating second of their ruin. I sat perfectly still, my posture straight, my expression completely unreadable. I looked right into Naomi's eyes. The arrogant smirk was entirely gone. She looked like a trapped animal. She finally realized this was never a civil dispute over a catering mistake. This was a meticulously planned execution of her entire life. Ms. Montgomery slammed her hands down onto the documents. Her face was flushed with a mixture of professional embarrassment and pure panic. As an officer of the court, she knew her clients had just committed massive federal perjury. She knew the video and the forged insurance policy elevated this case from a simple civil lawsuit directly into premeditated attempted murder. "We need a recess," Ms. Montgomery practically shouted, scrambling to gather the papers into her briefcase. "We demand an immediate recess." Gregory casually leaned back in his leather chair and folded his hands. "Take all the time you need, counselor," he replied coldly. "We are not going anywhere." The heavy, soundproof door of the conference room swung open violently. Jamal marched out into the brightly lit corridor of the law firm, his hand gripping Naomi's elbow so tightly that her knuckles were turning white. Miss Montgomery was still inside the room, frantically pacing and making hushed, panicked phone calls to the senior partners at her defense firm. I remained seated in my leather chair for a moment, letting the silence wash over me, before I quietly stood up and walked toward the glass wall that separated the conference room from the hallway. I stood just out of their direct line of sight, close enough to hear every single word of their crumbling marriage. "What did you do?" Jamal hissed, shoving Naomi slightly so her back hit the polished mahogany paneling of the hallway. His voice was shaking thick with a mixture of absolute rage and pure terror. "Tell me that video was fake, Naomi. Tell me you did not forge a $5 million insurance policy and try to kill your own sister." Naomi rubbed her arm, her eyes darting around the empty corridor to make sure no one else was watching. She was still trying to maintain her composed, innocent facade, but the cracks were rapidly expanding. "Keep your voice down," she snapped, stepping closer to him. "I did what I had to do to protect us, Jamal. You were $2 million in debt. You lied to me. You secretly threw our entire life savings into some volatile cryptocurrency market and lost everything. The private lenders were going to take the penthouse. They were going to ruin your reputation. I was trying to save our family." Jamal stared at her, his eyes wide with horror. He looked like he was seeing the woman he married for the very first time. "I made a terrible financial mistake," he fired back, his voice cracking. "I let my pride get the better of me. But I did not ask you to commit premeditated murder to fix it. I did not ask you to poison Audrey. You should be thanking me." Naomi fired back, her tone suddenly shifting from defensive to vicious. She pointed a manicured finger at his chest. "You are a broke, unemployed real estate agent facing massive federal loan fraud charges. If Audrey had died that night, all of our problems would have vanished. We would have had $5 million. I was willing to carry that secret for the rest of my life so you could keep playing the successful luxury broker." Jamal physically recoiled from her. He took 2 steps back, shaking his head slowly. The sheer calculated psychopathy in her voice was finally registering in his mind. He was a black man in America who had just lost his corporate shield. He knew exactly how the justice system would look at him if he were implicated in a wealthy executive's murder plot for insurance money. There would be no leniency. There would be no second chances. He was looking at 20 years in federal prison, and his own wife was the one who had happily dug the grave. "You are insane," Jamal whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "You actually thought you could get away with this. You forged her signature. You smiled at the security camera. You dragged me into a deposition to commit perjury under oath. I did it for us." Naomi pleaded, suddenly trying to change her tactic. She reached out, trying to grab his hands, tears welling up in her eyes. "I am your wife, Jamal. I am pregnant with our child. You have to stand by me. We can still fight this. My parents will hire a better lawyer. They will pay off the judge. We just have to stick together." Jamal swats her hands away so forcefully that she stumbled back against the wall. "Do not use a baby to manipulate me right now," he sneered, his voice dropping to a freezing, absolute low. "Because after watching you poison your own flesh and blood without blinking an eye, I do not even know if the pregnancy is real." Naomi gasped, genuine shock finally breaking through her arrogant mask. "Jamal, you cannot leave me here." "Watch me," he said. Jamal reached up, grabbed the knot of his expensive silk tie and yanked it loose. He looked at her with a profound, bone-chilling disgust. "I am done covering for you. I am done playing this game. I am going to walk out of this building, I am going to call my own lawyer, and I am going to tell the authorities every single thing I know. I will not go down for your psychopathic greed. He turned his back on her and started walking rapidly down the long corridor toward the elevator banks. Jamal Naomi screamed, abandoning all pretense of keeping her voice down. The shrill, desperate sound echoed off the glass walls. Jamal, come back here. You are nothing without my family. You hear me? You are nothing. Jamal did not stop. He did not turn around. He pressed the call button, stepped into the elevator, and the silver doors slid shut, severing their marriage permanently. I stood quietly behind the glass wall, watching my sister completely unravel. She slumped against the mahogany paneling, her hands covering her face, as she let out a loud, ugly sob. The golden child was finally completely alone. Her husband had abandoned her to save himself. The first pillar of her fake privileged life had just crashed to the ground, and I was going to make sure the rest of the building fell directly on top of her. I left the law firm through the private underground parking garage, completely bypassing the chaotic aftermath of my sister's ruined marriage. By the time I arrived back at my apartment, the sun was beginning to set over the Manhattan skyline, casting a cold, golden light across my living room. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water, walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, and looked out at the city. The civil suit was officially dead, but it had served its exact purpose. With the formal introduction of the forged life insurance policy and the clear video evidence of the poisoning, my legal team was already in the process of forwarding the entire file to the district attorney's office. The criminal charges against my sister were imminent. It was no longer a matter of if Naomi would be arrested, but exactly when the federal agents would kick down her door. I was just taking my first sip of water when my cell phone buzzed violently against the marble kitchen island. The caller ID flashed with my mother's name. For the past month, I had ignored every single one of their frantic calls and text messages. But tonight was different. Tonight, I knew exactly what they were going to say, and I wanted to hear the absolute panic in their voices. I walked over, tapped the green button, and placed the phone on speaker. "Audrey, you are an absolute monster," Diane screamed before I even had the chance to say hello. Her voice was shrill and echoing clearly on speakerphone from their end as well. "Your sister just called us, sobbing from the street outside your law firm." Jamal abandoned her. He left his pregnant wife crying on the sidewalk because of the sick, twisted lies you spun in that room today. I leaned against the cool marble counter. Lies, I repeated calmly. I handed them a high-definition video of her pouring poison into my food. I handed them a forged federal document with my name on it. There were no lies today, Mother. Only the consequences she has been avoiding her entire life. My father, Richard, suddenly cut in, his voice thick with arrogant fury. "You think you have won because you scared off that cheap defense attorney she hired? You think you can just intimidate Jamal into leaving her and walk away? But you have crossed a major line this time, Audrey. You pushed this far too far. We are not going to let you send your sister to prison over a pathetic catering dispute." I let out a slow, quiet breath. "It is no longer a civil dispute, Richard. It is federal insurance fraud and premeditated attempted murder. The district attorney does not care about your golden child complex. The FBI will be at her penthouse by the end of the week. We will see about that." Diane snapped back, a sickeningly triumphant tone suddenly creeping into her voice. "You think you are the only one with high-powered lawyers. We just retained Maxwell Grant. He is the most aggressive criminal defense attorney in the state of New York. He is going to tear your little security video apart in court and prove that you digitally altered it just to frame her. He is going to destroy you on the witness stand, Audrey." I narrowed my eyes slightly. I knew the name Maxwell Grant. He was a ruthless legal shark who defended corrupt politicians and wealthy criminals. He was also notoriously expensive. Maxwell Grant requires a massive six-figure retainer just to look at a case file, I stated flatly. Jamal is broke and $2 million in debt. Naomi maxed out her credit cards. You and Dad are retired. You do not have that kind of liquid cash lying around. We do now, Richard declared, proudly, completely blinded by his own toxic devotion to his youngest daughter. We took out a second mortgage on the family home this afternoon. We signed the final paperwork with the bank an hour ago and wired the funds directly to Grant's law firm. The room around me seemed to go completely still. I stared at the glowing screen of my cell phone, genuinely struggling to comprehend the sheer staggering magnitude of their stupidity. They were so desperate to save Naomi from the consequences of her own psychopathic actions that they had recklessly gambled the one thing they thought they actually owned. We leveraged the entire equity of our house to protect Naomi from your vindictive crusade, Diane added, completely mistaking my silence for defeat. We will spend every last dime we have to keep her out of prison and make sure you pay for trying to destroy this family. So go ahead and call the police, Audrey. We are ready for you. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. I did not feel angry. I felt an overwhelming sense of absolute victory. They had just handed me the final nail for their own coffin. You mortgaged the house? I asked, my voice dropping to a soft, almost amused whisper. Yes, we did, Richard fired back aggressively. And there is nothing you can do about it. My smile widened as I picked up the phone to take it off speaker. You really should not have done that, I said. I hung up the phone before they could ask me what I meant. The morning sun was shining brightly over the pristine, manicured lawns of my parents' suburban neighborhood when my black town car pulled into their long cobblestone driveway. It was exactly 9 o'clock. The brick colonial house looked exactly the same as it did when I was a child. It was a monument to their obsession with upper-middle-class appearances. But today, that monument was going to be officially dismantled. I stepped out of the vehicle wearing a sharp charcoal suit. I was not alone. Walking right beside me was Mr. Gallagher, a senior fraud investigator from the National Bank, where my parents had finalized their second mortgage the day before. Following closely behind him was a local process server. I walked up the front steps and pressed the glowing doorbell. It took less than a minute for the heavy oak door to swing open. My mother, Diane, stood in the doorway wearing a plush white bathrobe holding a steaming mug of coffee. The moment she saw me, her relaxed morning expression twisted into a mask of pure venom. What are you doing here? Diane snapped tightly, gripping the doorframe as if she wanted to slam it in my face. We told you last night, Audrey. We have nothing left to say to you. My father, Richard, appeared in the foyer right behind her, tying the belt of his robe. He looked at me, then looked at the two men standing behind me in dark suits. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, but his arrogance quickly buried it. If you are here to beg us to pull our financial support from your sister, you are wasting your time, Richard sneered, stepping out onto the porch to physically tower over me. The wire transfer to the Grant law firm cleared this morning. Naomi has the best defense attorney in the state. You have officially lost. I did not flinch. I did not even blink. I simply turned my head slightly and nodded to Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Gallagher stepped forward and handed my father a thick red stamped envelope. Richard, he began, his voice completely devoid of emotion. I am an investigator with the lending division of your bank. We are here to officially notify you that the 6-figure wire transfer has been intercepted and permanently frozen. Richard ripped the envelope out of the investigator's hand. Frozen, he shouted, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. You cannot freeze my money. I signed the mortgage agreement yesterday. I put the equity of my own house up as collateral. That is exactly the problem, Richard. I said, my voice cutting through the crisp morning air like a newly sharpened knife. You put up a house you do not actually own. My parents froze. Diane looked at me as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. What on earth are you talking about? She demanded, her voice trembling slightly. This has been our house for 30 years. Your grandmother left it to us when she passed away. No, she did not. I corrected her smoothly, taking a single step closer to the porch. Grandma Dorothy knew exactly how financially irresponsible you both were. She knew you would eventually squander her legacy to bail Naomi out of trouble, so she never put this house in your name. 5 years ago, right before she died, she quietly transferred the deed of this entire property into a blind trust. And I am the sole trustee and the exclusive beneficiary. Richard tore open the envelope and pulled out the legal documents. His eyes frantically scanned the crisp white pages. Right there, stamped and notarized by the county clerk, was the irrefutable proof. The house belonged entirely to me. My parents had just been living in it rent-free by my own silent grace. By deliberately claiming ownership of a property that does not belong to you and using my asset as collateral to secure a massive bank loan, you have committed first-degree federal bank fraud, Mr. Gallagher explained coldly. The bank is currently drafting the criminal complaint to submit to the authorities. Diane dropped her coffee mug. It hit the porch and shattered into dozens of jagged pieces, dark liquid splattering all over her white slippers. She let out a horrific, breathless gasp, clutching her chest as the absolute reality of her situation came crashing down. You forged ownership documents to pay for a criminal defense lawyer, I said, looking right into my father's terrified eyes. And in doing so, you just bought yourselves your very own felony charges. Naomi does not have a lawyer today. The money is gone. I took a step back and signaled the process server. He stepped forward and handed my mother a second envelope. Furthermore, I continued, my tone dropping to a dead hollow whisper. Because you attempted to encumber my property with a fraudulent lien, I am officially exercising my rights as the legal owner. You are holding an eviction notice. You have exactly 30 days to pack up your things and vacate my house before the sheriff physically removes you. Richard opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had just been shoved out of an airplane without a parachute. He fell to his knees right there on the porch, staring blankly at the shattered coffee mug. Diane began to sob hysterically, reaching out to grab my arm, begging me to tell the bank investigator it was all a big misunderstanding. I stepped completely out of her reach, turned my back on the house I grew up in, and walked down the cobblestone driveway to my waiting car. I did not look back. I drove straight from my parents' suburban neighborhood to my corporate office in Midtown Manhattan. The adrenaline from the morning confrontation had completely faded, replaced by the sharp, focused energy I used to manage million-dollar crisis campaigns. I walked through the revolving glass doors of my firm, grabbed a fresh coffee from the lobby cafe, and headed toward the private executive elevators. The sprawling marble lobby was packed with junior executives, high-profile clients, and administrative staff moving quietly through their morning routines. It was an environment built entirely on discretion and absolute professionalism, but that pristine atmosphere was violently shattered just 10 minutes later. I was standing near the reception desk, signing a stack of non-disclosure agreements for a new client, when I heard a shrill, hysterical voice echoing across the marble floor. "Where is she?" the voice screamed. "I demand to see my daughter right now." I turned around slowly. My mother Diane was practically clawing her way past the polished security turnstiles. She was still wearing the same clothes she had hastily thrown on after I left her porch. Her hair was a wild, unbrushed mess, and her face was stained with dark streaks of running mascara. Right behind her was my father Richard, his face purple with rage, aggressively shoving a young security guard who was trying to block his path. "You cannot just walk in here," the guard warned, reaching for the radio clipped to his belt. "This is a private commercial building. Get your hands off me!" Richard bellowed, his voice echoing off the high glass ceilings. Half the lobby stopped what they were doing and turned to stare at the commotion. "We are her parents. She is trying to steal our house." My assistant stepped out from behind the reception desk, looking absolutely terrified. She looked at me, waiting for a signal to call the police or rush me into a secure back room. In the world of corporate public relations, a public family meltdown is considered a catastrophic optics failure. People pay me hundreds of thousands of dollars to hide this exact kind of embarrassing behavior from the public eye. My parents knew this. They had deliberately followed me to my office because they thought I would be so terrified of a public scandal that I would immediately cave to their demands just to quiet them down. They completely miscalculated. I did not want to hide. I handed the pen back to the receptionist, smoothed the front of my charcoal blazer, and walked calmly toward the center of the lobby. "Let them through." "Frank," I called out to the head of security, my voice clear and completely steady. The guard stepped aside, leaving my parents standing in the middle of the massive open space. Dozens of my colleagues and clients were watching us in dead silence. Diane locked eyes with me and immediately launched into her rehearsed theatrics. "How could you do this to us?" Diane sobbed loudly, throwing her hands in the air for maximum dramatic effect. "You are making your own parents homeless. You sent a bank investigator to throw us out on the street. We raised you. We gave you everything. And you are doing this just because you are jealous of your pregnant sister." Richard stepped forward, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You are going to call that bank right now, Audrey. You are going to tell them the deed transfer was a mistake, and you are going to drop this ridiculous eviction. If you do not fix this immediately, I swear I will stand in this lobby all day and tell everyone exactly what kind of ungrateful monster you really are." The silence in the room was absolute. Every single person in the lobby was staring at me, waiting to see how the senior crisis executive would handle her own public nightmare. I did not lower my voice. I did not ask them to step into a private conference room. I wanted every single person in that building to hear exactly what I had to say. "I am not making you homeless, Richard," I stated, projecting my voice so it carried clearly across the marble walls. "You committed federal bank fraud by taking out a fraudulent mortgage on a property you do not own. You stole my equity to hire a criminal defense lawyer for your youngest daughter." Diane gasped loudly, trying to interrupt me, but I took a step forward and cut her off completely. "You tried to pay me off with a $50,000 check to cover up my attempted murder." I continued, my words hitting them like physical blows. "You sat in a restaurant yesterday and admitted on tape that you knew Naomi poisoned me. You knew she forged a $5 million life insurance policy, and you chose to protect her. So no, I am not calling the bank. I am pressing full charges." The color instantly drained from my father's face. He looked around the lobby, suddenly realizing that the dozens of wealthy clients and corporate executives watching them were not looking at me with disgust. They were looking at him with absolute horror. Now I said, my voice dropping to a freezing, authoritative command. "Get out of my building." Frank, the head of security, did not need to be told twice. He signaled to 3 other large guards who immediately surrounded my parents. Richard opened his mouth to argue, but a guard firmly grabbed him by the back of his collar and his belt, physically marching him toward the revolving doors. Diane began to wail a truly pathetic sound as 2 guards escorted her out by her arms. I stood perfectly still, watching as they were shoved out onto the busy Manhattan sidewalk. The heavy glass doors stopped spinning. I turned around, looked at my stunned assistant, and calmly asked her to bring the finalized client contracts up to my office. The meltdown was over, and I had not lost a single ounce of power. While my parents were busy being escorted out of my corporate lobby by armed security guards, Jamal was facing his own absolute destruction 50 blocks downtown. The New York State Board of Real Estate takes their ethical guidelines incredibly seriously, especially when millions of dollars of luxury property are involved. When my legal team forwarded the unredacted forensic accounting report to the state licensing authority, it triggered an immediate emergency disciplinary hearing. Jamal sat in a stiff leather chair inside the cold wood-paneled hearing room of the regulatory board. Across from him sat 3 stern commissioners. He was not wearing his signature custom-tailored suit today. He looked exhausted, the weight of his fractured marriage and his mounting crypto debt pressing down on him like a physical burden. But he still possessed that desperate, lingering hope that his natural charisma could talk him out of any corner. He was completely wrong. The lead commissioner did not ask Jamal to explain himself. He simply slid a thick binder across the table. It contained everything. It had the fraudulent income statements Jamal had meticulously doctored to secure the $3 million mortgage for the penthouse. It had the exhaustive records of his $2 million in hidden offshore cryptocurrency debt. And most damning of all, it contained the sworn deposition transcript where Jamal had committed federal perjury just a day earlier, claiming under oath that his finances were perfectly stable. Jamal tried to speak. He tried to use his charm, offering a trembling apology and blaming the entire situation on his wife's reckless spending habits. He played the victim, claiming he was just a hard-working man who had gotten in over his head. The commissioners did not even blink. In the luxury real estate market, trust and financial transparency are the only currencies that matter. Jamal had completely violated both. The board did not deliberate. The decision was unanimous and instantaneous. They did not suspend his license. They permanently revoked it. The lead commissioner coldly demanded that Jamal hand over his physical broker pocket card right then and there. It was the ultimate professional execution. In less than 20 minutes, Jamal was completely stripped of the one thing he valued above all else: his identity. He was no longer the prestigious, high-rolling Manhattan luxury broker who rubbed elbows with billionaires like Harrison. He was an unemployed, disgraced fraudster drowning in $2 million of unregulated debt. Jamal stumbled out of the State Building and out onto the busy Manhattan sidewalk. The noise of the city traffic roared around him, but he was trapped in a suffocating silence. He had walked out on Naomi at the law firm, thinking he could distance himself from her criminal actions and save his career. He now realized that the blast radius of my revenge did not care about his last-minute change of heart. I was burning the entire forest down, and he was standing right in the middle of it. Desperation is a terrifying thing. It strips away every last ounce of human dignity. Jamal pulled his cell phone from his pocket with trembling hands and dialed my direct office line. I had just sat down at my mahogany desk, the finalized client contracts resting neatly in front of me, when the phone rang. I saw Jamal's name flashing on the caller ID. I leaned back in my leather chair, tapped the speakerphone button, and let the silence stretch for a long moment before I finally spoke. "Hello, Jamal," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any sympathy. "Audrey, please," Jamal begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, breathless sob. The slick, arrogant businessman who had stood in my hospital room was entirely gone. "You have to stop this. They took my license. The board revoked it permanently. I have absolutely nothing left. My career is gone. The private lenders are going to kill me if I do not pay them back, and I have no way to make the money." I listened to him hyperventilate through the speaker. I felt no pity. I only felt the lingering phantom burn in my throat from the poison his wife had fed me in his own home. "You brought this on yourself," I replied coldly. "You forged financial documents. You lied under oath. I simply handed the truth to the people who needed to see it." "Audrey." "I did not know about the poison," Jamal pleaded, his voice rising in sheer panic. "I swear to God, I did not know about the life insurance policy. Naomi did that on her own. She is insane. You know I would never try to kill you. Please, Audrey. You know billionaires like Harrison. You know the banking executives. You can make a few phone calls. You can tell them the debt report was a mistake. I will testify against Naomi in federal court. I will give the police everything they need to lock her away forever. Just please give me my life back." I picked up the phone receiver, taking him off speaker, and brought it close to my mouth. "I remember you standing next to my hospital bed while I was still hooked up to a heart monitor," I whispered softly. "I remember you tossing a non-disclosure agreement onto my lap, telling me my near-death experience was just a little allergy scare that was threatening your reputation. You did not care about my life then, Jamal. You only care now because you got caught." "Audrey, please, we are family," he sobbed. I smiled, a cold, empty smile. "You sell houses, Jamal." "Oh, wait. Not anymore." I hung up the phone, placed it face down on my desk, and went back to work. I was not at the penthouse at exactly 6 o'clock the following morning, but as a public relations executive with deep connections to the New York media circuit, I did not need to be. I watched the entire event unfold live from the comfort of my living room, sipping a hot cup of coffee, as the local news helicopters circled the airspace above Jamal's former luxury building. Naomi was entirely alone in the $3 million apartment. Jamal had not returned since he walked out on her at the law firm. She had spent the entire night frantically calling my parents, desperate for updates on the Maxwell Grant retainer. She had finally fallen asleep just a few hours earlier, wrapped in her expensive silk sheets, desperately clinging to the delusion that her golden child status would somehow magically shield her from federal law. That delusion was violently shattered just before sunrise. The heavy mahogany door of the penthouse was not politely knocked on. It was breached with a tactical battering ram. The sound echoed through the entire top floor as a dozen armed federal agents in dark tactical gear poured into the pristine living room. They did not care about the custom Persian rug or the expensive velvet sofa. They moved with absolute terrifying efficiency, securing the perimeter and storming down the hallway toward the master suite. Naomi woke up to the sound of heavy combat boots kicking open her bedroom door. Before she could even sit up, the bright beams of tactical flashlights blinded her. Federal agents, a voice bellowed over the chaos. "Show your hands! Keep them where we can see them!" Naomi screamed, pulling the silk comforter up to her chest. She was completely disoriented, her perfect lifestyle influencer aesthetic replaced by sheer unfiltered panic. She demanded to know what was going on, shrieking at the officers that they had the wrong apartment and that they were trespassing on private property. She tried to reach for her cell phone on the nightstand, but an agent immediately stepped forward and kicked the phone across the room. Naomi was dragged out of bed and forced to stand barefoot on the hardwood floor. An agent grabbed her wrists, pulling them behind her back, and the cold steel of handcuffs snapped tightly around her skin. "You cannot do this to me!" Naomi sobbed hysterically, struggling against the restraints. "I am pregnant. I have a lawyer. You need to speak to Maxwell Grant right now. My parents paid him a 6-figure retainer yesterday. You are all going to lose your jobs for this." The lead federal agent stepped forward holding a thick stack of warrants. He looked at my sister with absolute disgust. "There is no retainer, Naomi," the agent stated coldly. "The wire transfer your parents attempted to send was frozen by the bank yesterday afternoon, under suspicion of federal fraud. You do not have a lawyer." The remaining color drained entirely from Naomi's face as the agent began reading the official charges. "You are being placed under arrest for federal wire fraud conspiracy to commit insurance fraud and premeditated attempted murder," the agent announced, his voice ringing with finality. Naomi stopped fighting. Her knees completely buckled, and 2 agents had to physically hold her up by her arms. The reality of the situation finally crushed the last remaining pillar of her arrogance. Her husband was gone. Her parents were facing their own felony charges and an imminent eviction. The high-powered lawyer was a ghost. She was entirely out of options. The agents marched her out of the bedroom, through the ruined living room, and into the private elevator. Naomi kept her head down, her blonde hair falling in messy tangles over her face. She likely assumed that because it was barely past 6 in the morning, she would be quietly slipped into the back of an unmarked car in the underground parking garage. She thought she could at least retain a tiny fraction of her dignity. She was wrong. As a crisis manager, I know exactly how to bury a story, but I also know exactly how to make one explode. The night before the raid, I had made a few anonymous, highly untraceable phone calls to my most aggressive contacts at the major tabloids and local news stations. I gave them the exact address, the exact time, and the exact names involved. When the elevator doors opened into the ground floor lobby, the federal agents did not take Naomi to the private garage. They marched her straight out the front glass doors and onto the main Manhattan sidewalk. The street was absolutely packed. Dozens of paparazzi news crews and aggressive reporters were waiting behind police barricades. The moment Naomi stepped outside in her wrinkled pajamas, barefoot and handcuffed, a blinding storm of camera flashes erupted. Reporters shoved microphones toward her face, shouting questions about the poisoned soup, the forged life insurance policy, and her husband's revoked license. Naomi tried to hide her face behind her shoulders, weeping uncontrollably as the cameras documented every single second of her public destruction. The golden child, the perfect lifestyle influencer who had built her entire identity on feeling superior to everyone else, was being broadcast live to millions of people as a desperate, pathetic criminal. I watched her being shoved into the back of the federal transport vehicle on my television screen. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling a profound, quiet sense of peace. The trap was fully closed. The district attorney's office in Lower Manhattan was a far cry from the opulent boardrooms and luxury penthouses Jamal was accustomed to. It was a cramped, windowless room with scuffed linoleum floors and the harsh hum of fluorescent lights overhead. My lead attorney, Gregory, had been working closely with the federal prosecutors, providing them with the meticulously organized evidence file we had built. Because of my status as the victim and my legal team's heavy involvement, I was kept informed of every single development in real time. Jamal sat at the battered metal table wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt. He had not slept in days. Across from him sat an aggressive assistant district attorney and 2 federal investigators. Jamal did not have a high-priced defense lawyer sitting next to him. Since his bank accounts were frozen and his real estate license was permanently revoked, He was accompanied by an overworked court-appointed public defender who looked completely exhausted. The prosecutor did not waste time playing games. He slid a thick stack of printed photographs and financial documents across the table. He laid out exactly what Jamal was facing: federal loan fraud, perjury, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. The prosecutor explained that because the fraudulent life insurance policy was tied to an attempted murder, Jamal was looking at a minimum of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Jamal began to hyperventilate. He buried his face in his hands, crying openly in front of the federal agents. He begged them to understand that he only lied about his crypto debt to protect his pride. He swore on his life that he had absolutely no idea his wife was planning to poison me and cash in a forged $5 million policy. The prosecutor let him cry for a moment before sliding a single, freshly printed document across the table. It was a formal plea agreement. The deal was incredibly simple. The district attorney offered to drop the conspiracy to commit murder charge and recommend a suspended sentence with 3 years of probation for the financial crimes. Jamal would avoid a prison cell entirely, but in exchange he had to provide full, unconditional cooperation. He had to formally testify against Naomi in open court. He had to hand over her passwords, grant access to her personal laptop, and confirm under oath that she alone orchestrated the premeditated poisoning to pay off his debts. It took Jamal less than 30 seconds to make his decision. There was no hesitation. There was no lingering loyalty to his pregnant wife. When faced with the terrifying reality of spending the next 2 decades in a concrete box, Jamal abandoned his marriage completely. He picked up the cheap plastic pen provided by the prosecutor and signed his name at the bottom of the agreement. He then spent the next 3 hours giving the federal agents everything they needed. He detailed how Naomi had grown increasingly desperate about the money. He gave them the passcode to her encrypted cloud storage, which contained her internet search history. The agents found exactly what they were looking for. Weeks before the dinner party, Naomi had searched for lethal doses of shellfish extract and tutorials on forging legal signatures. Later that afternoon, Naomi was sitting in a freezing holding cell at the federal detention center. She was still wearing the wrinkled pajamas she had been arrested in. She had spent the entire morning demanding to speak to the warden, threatening to sue the facility, and insisting her parents were on their way with a team of elite lawyers to bail her out. Instead of her parents, a young, exhausted public defender walked into the visitor room and sat across from her. Naomi demanded to know when she was going home. The public defender did not answer her directly. Instead, he opened his briefcase and pulled out the discovery file the prosecutor had just handed him. He slid a copy of a sworn affidavit across the metal table. Naomi looked down at the paper. At the bottom of the page was Jamal's signature. She read the words slowly. Her own husband had completely sold her out. He had painted her as a psychopathic, greedy monster who acted entirely alone. He had given the government the exact digital evidence they needed to lock her away for decades. The public defender quietly informed her that her parents could not post bail because their assets were frozen under a federal bank fraud investigation. They were facing their own criminal indictments and eviction. Naomi sat in the cold concrete room as the absolute finality of her situation crushed the breath out of her lungs. The protective bubble of her privilege was gone. Her beauty, her social media followers, and her parents' blind adoration meant absolutely nothing inside a federal prison. For the first time in her 30 years of life, she realized she had no one to manipulate and nowhere to hide. She was completely and utterly alone, trapped in a nightmare of her own making, waiting for the devastating judgment that was about to fall. 3 months later, the heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse swung open to mark the beginning of the criminal trial. The grand courtroom was packed with journalists, legal analysts, and curious onlookers who had been following the dramatic collapse of my family. I sat in the front row of the gallery wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal blazer, my posture absolutely straight. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. At the defense table sat Naomi. She looked completely unrecognizable from the arrogant lifestyle influencer who had hosted that lavish dinner party. She was wearing a faded, oversized maternity dress. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy knot, and she had deliberately forgone any makeup to highlight the dark, exhausted circles under her eyes. She was heavily pregnant now, and she used her condition as her primary weapon. Every time the jury filed into the room, Naomi would place both hands protectively over her swollen belly, looking down with wide, tearful eyes. It was a calculated performance designed to invoke sympathy. Her exhausted public defender had built the entire defense strategy around this fragile image. During his opening statement, he tried to paint Naomi as a stressed, overwhelmed young woman who simply made a clumsy, unfortunate mistake. He argued that the entire incident was a tragic accident born out of ignorance, not malice. He claimed Naomi did not understand the true severity of my allergy, and that she only wanted to humble her successful older sister by causing a mild reaction. It was a desperate narrative, but looking at the jury box, I could see a few of the jurors softening with pity. A pregnant woman crying softly at the defense table is a powerful image. But I build and destroy public narratives for a living. I knew exactly how to dismantle her performance. The federal prosecutor called me as the first primary witness. I stood up, walked past the wooden gate, and stepped into the witness box. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the whole truth. When I sat down and looked across the courtroom, my eyes locked directly onto Naomi. She quickly looked away, staring down at her lap and rubbing her belly again. I looked around the gallery behind her. My parents were completely absent. They were too busy dealing with their own federal fraud indictments and their impending eviction to attend their golden child's trial. Naomi was truly on her own. The prosecutor began his direct examination, asking me to describe the events of the housewarming party. I spoke clearly and calmly, pitching my voice so that every single juror could hear me without the microphone. I did not sound angry or bitter. I sounded like an expert witness delivering an indisputable corporate report. I detailed my lifelong medical history and established that every member of my family was completely aware of how lethal a single drop of shellfish could be. Then came the cross-examination. Naomi's public defender approached the podium, shuffling his notes nervously. He tried to undermine my credibility by painting me as a vindictive older sister. He asked if it was true that Naomi and I had a difficult relationship. He asked if I harbored resentment toward her because she was the favorite child. He suggested that I was exaggerating the emotional trauma of the event to punish her for past family grievances. I did not take the bait. I leaned forward slightly and answered him with absolute clinical precision. I told him our childhood relationship was completely irrelevant to the fact that his client poured concentrated poison into my food. He tried to pivot, arguing that Naomi merely thought she was adding a harmless flavor enhancer to a bland vegan soup. He asked how she could have possibly known the exact lethal dosage. That was the exact opening I was waiting for. I looked directly at the jury box and explained the mechanics of the poison. I told them that the substance Naomi used was not a common grocery store ingredient. It was a highly concentrated industrial food additive that had to be specially ordered from a commercial supply company. I stated clearly that one does not accidentally stumble upon pure crab extract while cooking a vegan tomato bisque. I reminded the court that the security footage showed her deliberately concealing the vial in her pocket, waiting until the kitchen was completely empty, and then carefully stirring the liquid into my specific bowl to hide the evidence. A clumsy mistake happens when you accidentally confuse salt and sugar, I told the public defender, keeping my tone perfectly even. Purchasing industrial-grade shellfish extract, hiding it in your designer dress, and secretly slipping it into the meal of a person with a documented level 4 allergy is not a mistake. It is an execution. Before I stepped down from the stand, the federal prosecutor approached the podium for one final redirect question. He asked me to describe exactly what I experienced when my throat closed up on that Persian rug. I did not exaggerate or use emotional language. I simply described the biological terror of anaphylaxis. I described the sensation of my windpipe shrinking to the size of a straw, the burning in my chest, and the absolute darkness pulling me under. I told the jury that while my sister sat in her chair sipping expensive white wine and smiling, my heart was mere seconds away from completely stopping. The courtroom fell completely silent. The jurors who had been looking at Naomi with pity just moments before were now staring at her with profound horror. The illusion of the innocent, overwhelmed mother was entirely shattered. Naomi's public defender stammered, completely unable to counter the cold, undeniable logic of my testimony. He quickly stated he had no further questions and practically retreated to his seat. I stood up from the witness box, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor as I walked back to my seat in the gallery. Naomi was still rubbing her belly, but her hands were violently shaking. The jury had stopped seeing a helpless victim. They finally saw the monster hiding underneath the maternity dress. The prosecution called their next witness. The heavy wooden door at the side of the courtroom opened and Jamal walked in. He looked nothing like the confident, arrogant luxury real estate broker I had known for years. He wore a simple off-the-rack suit that fit him poorly. His shoulders were slumped and his eyes remained fixed on the floor as he approached the witness box. Just as he was raising his right hand to be sworn in, the heavy doors at the back of the gallery pushed open. My parents, Richard and Diane, slipped quietly into the back row. They looked completely broken. The immense stress of their impending eviction and their own looming federal bank fraud charges had aged them a decade in just 3 months. They had managed to drag themselves to the courthouse to watch their golden child, desperately hoping for some kind of legal miracle. Instead, they were about to watch her husband bury her alive. Jamal sat down and leaned toward the microphone. The federal prosecutor did not waste any time with pleasantries. He immediately asked Jamal to explain the true state of his finances leading up to the housewarming party. Jamal took a shaky breath, looked briefly at the jury, and confessed everything. He admitted that their lavish lifestyle was a complete illusion built on maxed-out credit cards and fraudulent loans. He testified under oath that he had lost $2 million in unregulated cryptocurrency markets and that violent private lenders were threatening to destroy his life and reputation. The jury listened in absolute silence as the motive for my murder was laid out with terrifying clarity. Naomi needed millions of dollars, and she needed it immediately. The prosecutor then brought up the $5 million life insurance policy. He asked Jamal if he had any knowledge of the document before it was presented at the civil deposition. Jamal shook his head emphatically. He stated clearly that he had absolutely no idea Naomi had taken out a policy on my life, nor did he know she had forged my signature. He testified that the moment he saw the forged document and the security video, he realized his pregnant wife was trying to murder my sister to pay off his financial mistakes. Naomi was gripping the edge of the defense table so hard her knuckles were stark white. Her public defender leaned over, frantically whispering in her ear to remain calm, but she was vibrating with absolute, uncontainable rage. Then the prosecutor delivered the final crushing blow. He handed Jamal a printed log of digital forensic evidence and asked him to identify it. Jamal confirmed it was a verified export of Naomi's encrypted cloud storage and personal internet search history. He explained that as part of his plea deal to avoid a prison sentence, he had granted the FBI full unrestricted access to her digital accounts. Read the highlighted search queries from the week leading up to the dinner party, the prosecutor instructed, his voice echoing in the quiet room. Jamal swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he read the words aloud to the court. How to forge a legal signature, tracing digital documents for insurance. And then he paused, taking a ragged breath, before reading the most damning search of all. Lethal doses of concentrated crab extract. The words hung in the sterile air of the courtroom like a physical death sentence. The public defender buried his face in his hands. There was no spinning this. There was no clumsy mistake defense left to argue. It was cold, calculated, premeditated, attempted murder, mapped out keystroke by keystroke. Liar. The scream ripped through the courtroom, completely shattering the professional decorum. Naomi violently pushed her heavy wooden chair back and stood up. The fragile, overwhelmed pregnant woman act instantly vanished, replaced by the vicious, arrogant monster she truly was. "You are a pathetic liar, Jamal!" Naomi shrieked at the top of her lungs, pointing a shaking finger directly at the witness stand. "You are a broke, worthless failure. I did this for you. I tried to save your pathetic life, And you sold me out to save yourself. You are nothing without me." The judge immediately slammed his gavel, ordering Naomi to sit down and remain silent, but she was entirely out of control. She screamed that Jamal was a coward and that I was a jealous, arrogant witch who deserved to choke on that floor. The jury watched in absolute horror as the golden child completely unraveled, showing them exactly who she was behind closed doors. Two federal marshals quickly stepped forward, grabbing Naomi by the arms and forcing her back into her seat as she continued to thrash and curse. I turned my head and looked at the back row of the gallery. Richard and Diane were clutching each other, weeping uncontrollably. The loud, agonizing sobs of my mother echoed over the shocked murmurs of the crowded room. For 30 years they had turned a blind eye to Naomi's cruelty. They had sacrificed my childhood, my safety, and ultimately their own freedom and family home to protect her. But looking at her screaming violently in a federal courtroom entirely devoid of any remorse for trying to kill me, there were no more excuses left to make. The illusion was completely shattered. They were finally forced to witness the terrifying reality of the monster they had created, and they knew they had lost absolutely everything to defend her. The jury deliberation lasted less than 4 hours. In a complex federal trial involving financial fraud and attempted murder, a rapid decision is never a good sign for the defense. It means there was no debate in the deliberation room. The evidence was absolute. When the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a verdict, the atmosphere in the courtroom instantly shifted. The heavy wooden doors opened, and the 12 jurors filed back into the jury box. None of them looked at Naomi. That is the universal tell. When a jury is about to convict, they never look at the defendant. I sat in the front row of the gallery, perfectly still, my hands resting calmly in my lap. Naomi was brought back in by the armed federal marshals. Her explosive, violent rage from earlier in the trial had completely evaporated, replaced by a hollow, trembling panic. She kept looking back over her shoulder at the gallery, desperately seeking eye contact with our parents. But Richard and Diane could not even bring themselves to lift their heads. They sat in the very back row, staring down at the scuffed floor, completely broken. The federal judge instructed the defendant to rise. Naomi struggled to stand. Her pregnant belly made her movements clumsy, and she had to lean heavily on the wooden defense table just to keep her balance. The jury foreman, an older woman with a stern, unforgiving expression, stood up holding a single sheet of printed paper. The judge asked if the jury had reached a unanimous verdict. The foreman confirmed they had. The clerk walked over, took the paper from the foreman, and handed it up to the judge. The judge reviewed the document in complete silence. His expression remained totally unreadable before he handed it back down to the clerk to be read aloud for the official court record. On the count of federal wire fraud, the clerk read his voice projecting cleanly through the dead silent room. "We find the defendant guilty." Naomi let out a sharp, breathless gasp, her knees buckling slightly. "On the count of conspiracy to commit federal insurance fraud?" The clerk continued without a single pause. "We find the defendant guilty." The public defender closed his eyes and hung his head in defeat. "And on the primary charge of premeditated attempted murder in the second degree," the clerk read, looking up briefly from the paper. "We find the defendant guilty." Naomi collapsed back into her heavy wooden chair. There was no screaming this time. There were no fake tears or demands to speak to a manager. She just stared blankly at the polished wood of the table as the crushing weight of reality finally broke her. She was officially a convicted violent felon. The defense weakly requested the jury be polled, a standard and usually pointless delay tactic. Every single juror looked directly at the judge and confidently confirmed their guilty vote. The evidence of her internet searches, the forged signature, and the high-definition security video was simply too overwhelming to dispute. Once the jury was formally thanked and dismissed, the judge did not immediately move to adjourn the proceedings. Instead, he folded his hands on his high wooden bench, leaned forward, and looked directly down at Naomi. In my 20 years on the federal bench, the judge began, his voice resonating with deep, unforgiving authority. "I have presided over cases involving hardened syndicate members and career violent criminals. But the sheer, cold-blooded psychopathy displayed in this courtroom over the past week is something I will not soon forget. You did not just attempt to take a human life. You attempted to murder your own sister, a woman who trusted you enough to eat at your table. You did it with a smile on your face, and you planned to fund a shallow, fraudulent lifestyle with the price of her blood. Naomi sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking, but the judge was not finished. He lifted his gaze from the defense table and looked directly out into the crowded gallery, locking eyes with Richard and Diane in the back row. And to the parents of the defendant, the judge continued his tone, turning even more scathing and sharp. While you are not currently on trial in my specific courtroom today, your profound moral bankruptcy is a matter of public record. You sat by and enabled a monster. When presented with undeniable proof that your daughter attempted a brutal murder, your first instinct was not to seek justice for the child who was poisoned. Your instinct was to bribe the victim, commit federal bank fraud, and mortgage your own home to shield the perpetrator from the consequences of her own evil. Your willful blindness created the exact arrogance that led your daughter to believe she could play God with a human life. Richard buried his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving as the judge publicly stripped away the very last shred of their upper-class dignity. Diane openly wept, curling into herself as the dozens of reporters in the room furiously transcribed every single word of their public humiliation. "You will lose your home," the judge stated bluntly to my parents. "You will face your own federal indictments. And you have absolutely no one to blame but yourselves." He turned his absolute terrifying attention back to Naomi. "The defendant will be remanded immediately into federal custody without bail pending the formal sentencing hearing. Court is adjourned." The sharp, explosive crack of the wooden gavel echoed through the room like a gunshot. The trial was over. 2 weeks later, the formal sentencing hearing was a swift and brutal conclusion to the nightmare. Naomi stood before the same federal judge, but the calculated maternity act was no longer an option. She had given birth to a healthy baby boy while in federal custody just days prior. Because Jamal was a convicted felon drowning in debt, and my parents were facing their own federal indictments, the child was immediately placed into the state foster system. Naomi was brought into the courtroom, wearing a standard-issue beige prison jumpsuit, her wrists shackled to a heavy chain around her waist. She looked hollow, completely stripped of her designer clothes and her arrogant smirk. The judge did not offer a single ounce of leniency. He looked down from his high wooden bench and officially sentenced Naomi to 12 consecutive years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply stared blankly at the polished wooden table as the federal marshals led her away in chains. Her life as a golden child was permanently over. Jamal received exactly what his plea deal had promised. The judge handed him a suspended sentence with 3 years of strictly supervised probation. He walked out of the courtroom a free man, but his freedom was a completely empty victory. Stripped of his luxury real estate license and permanently banned from the financial sector, his career was utterly annihilated. With $2 million in unregulated cryptocurrency debt hanging over his head and aggressive private lenders threatening his life, Jamal had to take the only job that would accept a convicted federal fraudster. The man who used to wear bespoke Italian suits and drink vintage wine with billionaires was now working the midnight shift as a janitor, mopping the marble floors of the exact same luxury commercial buildings he once tried to sell. I walked out of the heavy double doors of the courtroom, the crisp, cool air of the courthouse hallway feeling incredibly light. My lead attorney walked beside me, quietly discussing the final paperwork needed to permanently close this chapter. As we approached the main elevator banks, 2 disheveled figures stepped out from the shadows of the massive stone pillars. It was Richard and Diane. I stopped in my tracks. They looked completely destroyed. The eviction notice I had legally served them had been enforced just 3 days prior. The county sheriff had physically removed them from my grandmother's house. The federal bank fraud charges had prompted the government to freeze and drain their remaining bank accounts, leaving them completely and entirely bankrupt. They were standing in the courthouse hallway, holding cheap canvas duffel bags, the last pathetic remnants of their 30 years of upper-middle-class arrogance. Audrey, My mother croaked, her voice trembling and weak. She took a desperate step toward me, reaching out a shaking, wrinkled hand. "Please wait." I did not step back. I just looked at her, my face a mask of absolute, impenetrable indifference. "We have absolutely nowhere to go," my father Richard said, his voice completely hollowed out. All of his aggressive, towering rage had vanished, replaced by the terrified whimper of a broken man. "The bank took everything. Our accounts are frozen. The defense lawyers abandoned us the second the money dried up. We slept in a cheap motel on the highway last night, but our credit cards are declining. We cannot even afford another evening there." Diane began to sob, a wet, ugly sound that echoed pitifully down the long marble corridor. "Please, Audrey, you live in that massive apartment in Manhattan. You have that beautiful guest room. We are your parents. You cannot just leave us to freeze on the street. We will do anything you ask. We will clean your floors. We will cook your meals. Just please find it in your heart to let us come home with you until we can figure this out." I stood perfectly still, looking at the two people who had spent my entire 33 years of life, making me feel completely worthless. I looked at the parents who had willingly committed federal fraud and mortgaged my own property just to defend the sister who tried to murder me for insurance money. They were finally on their knees, stripped of their pride, begging for the very protection and shelter they had actively denied me when I was suffocating to death on a Persian rug. I felt absolutely nothing for them. There was no anger left in my chest. There was no lingering childhood sorrow. There was only the cold, sterile satisfaction of a perfectly executed crisis management campaign. The toxicity had been surgically removed from my life. I looked my mother dead in the eyes. I remembered the lavish restaurant where my sister had once publicly humiliated me while my parents laughed along. I took a slow, deep breath, delivering the final, devastating blow. "Go find another table," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet hallway like a blade. "This one is for family." I did not wait to watch their faces crumble. I did not wait to hear my father's desperate pleas. I turned my back on them, stepped into the waiting elevator, and pressed the button for the lobby. I stared straight ahead as the heavy silver doors slid shut, cutting off my mother's wail and severing my ties to them forever. The descent in the elevator felt like shedding a physical weight. With every floor, the heavy metal box dropped another layer of the guilt. The obligation and the toxic childhood conditioning simply peeled away and vanished. For 33 years, I had carried the suffocating burden of trying to be the perfect daughter to people who never actually wanted me. I had funded their vacations, endured their insults, and smiled politely while my sister was handed the world on a silver platter. But as the elevator bell chimed softly and the silver doors slid open at the ground floor lobby, I stepped out as an entirely different woman. The burden was gone. I was completely free. I walked across the vast marble floor of the federal courthouse lobby. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of my heels echoed off the high stone walls, a sound of absolute authority. I bypassed the security checkpoints, ignoring the lingering stares of a few reporters who were still loitering near the metal detectors. I pushed through the heavy revolving glass doors and stepped out onto the wide concrete stairs. The bright late afternoon sun of New York City immediately washed over me. The air was crisp, and the deafening, chaotic noise of Manhattan traffic roared to life around me. It was a beautiful, vibrant contrast to the sterile, miserable courtroom I had just left behind. The city was moving forward, and for the first time in my life, nothing was holding me back. Parked directly at the curb, completely ignoring a designated loading zone, was the sleek black Maybach. Harrison was standing outside, leaning casually against the passenger side door. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, his hands resting in his pockets. He looked completely at ease, a billionaire tech titan unbothered by the chaos of the city streets. When he saw me walking down the wide stone steps, a genuine smile touched the corners of his mouth. He did not offer a hug. He did not ask me how I was feeling or offer empty emotional platitudes about family trauma. He knew me far too well for that. Instead, as I reached the bottom step and walked up to him, he reached into the back seat of the car and pulled out a thick black leather folder. The cover was embossed with the gold foil logo of my public relations firm. He held it out to me. I took the heavy folder and opened it right there on the sidewalk. Inside was a legally binding contract printed on thick, expensive paper. I scanned the bold legal text at the top of the page. It was a formal partnership agreement. The board of directors at my corporate firm had held an emergency closed-door meeting that very morning. They had watched me navigate a massive high-profile federal scandal involving my own family without allowing a single drop of bad press to leak onto the company. They had watched me systematically dismantle a threat with ruthless, calculated precision. Recognizing that my crisis management skills were entirely unparalleled, they had voted unanimously. I was no longer just a senior executive. I had been officially promoted to senior partner. I was now a stakeholder in the empire, complete with a massive equity share and a 7-figure base salary. I made a personal call to the board chairman this morning. Harrison said, his voice smooth and deeply satisfied. I simply wanted to congratulate them on their brilliant decision. I also subtly reminded them that my billion-dollar account stays exactly where you are. You earned every single piece of this, Audrey. I closed the leather folder, the smooth material feeling cool against my fingertips. I looked up at Harrison, feeling a profound sense of mutual respect. He had saved my life on that Persian rug, but I had fought my own war. Harrison reached out and opened the heavy car door for me. "Where to, senior partner?" he asked. "Take me back to the office," I replied. A calm, razor-sharp smile forming on my lips. "We have a corporate merger to announce by 5 o'clock and I never miss a deadline." I slid into the luxurious leather seat. Harrison closed the door with a solid, expensive thud, instantly shutting out the loud noise of the Manhattan street. I leaned back against the headrest as the powerful engine purred to life. The car pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving the federal courthouse, my ruined sister, and my broken parents far behind in the rear-view mirror. I watched the towering glass skyscrapers of the city blur past the tinted windows, feeling an overwhelming electric surge of pure victory. They thought a bowl of soup would break me, but I handle crises for a living. When you hand me a mess, I hand you a prison sentence. My life is finally mine, and there is no room left for dead weight. The story of Audrey serves as a powerful testament to the fact that shared DNA does not automatically earn someone a permanent place in your life. For decades, societal expectations have conditioned us to believe that family is an unbreakable bond, forcing many to endure toxic, manipulative, and even dangerous behaviors simply because it comes from a sibling or a parent. However, the most profound lesson we can extract from this ordeal is that true empowerment begins the moment you stop seeking validation from those who are committed to misunderstanding and diminishing you. Audrey's journey illustrates that setting immovable boundaries is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of radical self-preservation. When faced with betrayal, she did not crumble into the familiar role of the victim, nor did she scream into the void trying to make irrational people see reason. Instead, she leaned into her independence, gathered her facts, and let the consequences of their own malicious actions dismantle their fraudulent lives. We often carry the heavy, unearned guilt of trying to fix people who are actively trying to break us. This story gives us the permission to drop that weight entirely. You are not obligated to offer your hard-earned success, your peace of mind, or your physical safety as collateral to maintain the illusion of a happy family. Your loyalty should always belong first and foremost to your own well-being. Walking away from toxic relatives does not make you cold. It makes you a survivor who refuses to compromise your worth for the sake of an empty holiday dinner table. If you have ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect your own peace, please like this video, share your story in the comments below, and subscribe for more empowering content.